There are 7.5 billion living souls on planet Earth. How could we all possibly be relevant? We are all relevant because within each of us is a custom-built, unique story. We are all significant, we do matter, and I'm going to prove it one amazing story at a time. My home province of Ontario makes up 0.2% of the global population, and we're going to start there. One day, I will call on you.
Awakened, refreshed, got strength for the fight.
Greetings, and thank you for listening to This is Ontario. I'm your host, David Joyce, and we are recording downtown and underground Peterborough. With me in studio today is Kevin Wilson. I met Kevin through my good pal Steve Walker when I was looking for a drummer for a special project. I came to discover that Kevin's dad is the one and only Larry Wilson. Larry had a rich history as a radio personality for Chum FM at a special time when rock music was taking the world by storm. Let's learn some amazing things about Larry and his son Kevin by going back to the very beginning. So Kevin, where were you born, who was there, and how did that go?
Am I supposed to answer that now?
Yes.
It went really well as far as I'm concerned. I showed up.
And where was this?
I was born in Quebec City.
Really?
My dad started in radio, and they went to college in Quebec, and he was one of those war babies that came back that was adopted. He was American and then adopted to a Canadian, or my grandmother, who was actually American. They came to Canada to adopt a baby.
Really?
And that's where my dad came from, yeah.
So they adopted him in Quebec and then moved back to the States?
No, they stayed in Quebec because that was the stipulation during war times. Yeah, they came over to Canada to adopt a baby because they couldn't get one in the States, and here we are.
So they became like instant Canadian citizens?
Correct, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was back in the 40s, I guess.
And so how did you get from there to, I guess, did you move to Toronto or?
No, well, as radio would do it, you're town to town, up and down the dial, just like WKRP. What happened was my dad went to radio college in Stansted, Quebec, and then from there she got a gig in, I believe it was Quebec City Radio. Hated the French language, so he moved then to, I believe, Chatham, Ontario. Got picked up by a station there, then to Kingston, then from Kingston to Toronto.
Really?
Yeah. And
eventually to Chum FM.
Correct, Chum AM originally to start.
Oh.
He started in 1965 at Chum AM. It was Dick Smythe was the news director. My dad was the sports director. Really? So my dad was a sports jock kind of guy, but he wasn't really a jock kind of guy at all. He was only 5'7", but he's a wealth of knowledge. He sponged in everything, and he really liked CFL football.
Really?
Thought hockey players were dumb looking. I can give him that. Hence why he put me in hockey and football. But yeah.
Really?
And yeah. When he was at Chum AM, it was a great time in my life for sure, because I used to run around the halls of 1331 Yonge, and Mr. Waters, the owner, always thought of us as a big family. I remember him saying to me, "Kevin, I'll buy you a Coke from the lobby." They had a Coke machine in the lobby. He says, "I'll buy you a Coke, but you got to promise not to run up and down the halls making lots of noise." And I'm like, "Yes, Mr. Waters." And everybody called him Mr. Waters.
Really?
Yeah.
And then you'd have a Coke full of sugar and run up and down the halls.
Exactly. Yeah, guys, jocks running out of the studio. You just tell that kid to shut up. My dad, at the time, was doing news, so he was in the newsroom. That was a boring place for me. I'd rather be where the music was.
Right.
So. And
apparently your dad wanted to be there too. So how did that all come about?
I'm not really sure how it came about. I know the FM of Chum FM in 72, they were looking for people, and my dad immediately went, well, I believe Dick Smythe had got fired for Chum or for chucking a typewriter across the newsroom. But yeah, my dad ended up doing AM news, and then when FM started, he thought it would be a natural fit because just seemed like a more relaxed environment.
Right.
So he moved over to the FM side and ate the brownies that viewers or listeners sent in, and the rest is history. Yeah, and then him and Brian Thomas was the news director. They had a show called In Toronto, and my dad was the morning man also, like the morning news guy.
Right.
For Roger, Rick, and Marilyn. My dad was the news guy. He was never mentioned, but you always knew his voice.
Right.
And so he used to wear a button that says, "I'm almost famous," because everybody knew his voice, but nobody really remembered his name. Yeah, and everybody just called him Wilson.
Yep.
Just Wilson, not Larry Wilson or anything like that. His full name was Larry C. Wilson, and he always told people that the C stood for Chrysler. But it was actually Clifford.
Why Chrysler?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Oh.
No idea whatsoever.
So from the news to music, how did that happen?
That happened, my dad just got burned out from the news. It was always bad news. He wanted good news. He was just sick of reading about death and destruction and politics, and he'd had a good long 20-year career doing news and sports and things
up to
like
this point,
yeah. And it was started to get to him, and the alcohol was turning into a bit of an issue. It was what he used to call media-induced alcoholism, and it's true of a lot of folks. That's the way they deal with things, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The news is usually bad.
Yeah, I don't know if he'd actually survive news in this day and time.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would, because he took things a lot to heart.
Right.
He did he's done productions he did a show called I believe it was called Dancing in the Rain, and it was about an autistic kid, and it was like just to bring things to. It was a documentary, and it won awards. So
Really?
yeah.
Huh.
And then there's a couple of people like Warren Cosford and Dougie Thompson, and they're keeping the Chum vibe alive. They're getting old air checks. They're preserving the history of Chum radio when it was in the glory days.
Sure.
And there's a rock radio scrapbook also that has different things with my dad on it, and you can always find them at what's the name of the site? I believe it's called Don't Say Hello, Say I Listen to Chum. And it's a web page, and you can check that out, and it's got all the Chum information on there.
Right.
You never
Okay,
need to
well,
know.
we'll figure out what that is, and I'll make sure to keep that in the show notes here. So if anybody's interested in seeing that, you'll find it in the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And he did other things as well. He didn't just stick to the radio. He dabbled in production a lot. He did a lot of work with, he actually studied with Jack Richardson, who was from Nimbus 9 Studios, who produced the Guess Who, Alice Cooper, bands like that.
Right.
And he learned production from them. And then he decided to go off on his own, find a couple of bands. So he ended up finding this band called Whistle King. And what they did is Chum had, before the Q107 Homegrown album, Chum had this thing called Super Sessions, where they took about 500 bands and listened to them all, auditioned them all, and brought it down to the final 10. And yeah, we can run that clip if you like, and
yes,
that'll tell you something about it.
We have that clip. So was your dad instrumental in picking the bands?
He was. It was between Whistle King and Honeymoon Suite, I believe it was.
Really?
And my dad was adamant that it be Whistle King.
Wow.
And I guess there was quite a bit of a war going on between the judges.
Yeah.
And ended up Whistle King won it.
Wow. Who later became the Kings.
Correct.
Right on. Okay, so let's listen to that clip.
Here is the winning entry from Whistle King, and again our congratulations on In Toronto. Turn your face to the wall, Whistle King.
With a woman like you, 1 minute you're happy, next minute you're blue.
We kind of thought that this was the song that might turn on record companies to your sound or a sound and go a long way with it. Are you planning on being professional all the time?
All the way. Of course, yeah. Like that's our goal. We want to record. We want to get somewhere in this business. We've worked a long time at it, and we've got a style. We've got a sound, and I think we can do it. Like we need some help.
Well, part of the prize is that we'll turn over your demo tape to all the record companies and let them hear it, and set you up that way. So you're guaranteed a listen of all the A&R directors of all the record companies we can find in Canada. Turn my face to the wall, Whistle King. All right. Chum FM's Super Session winners. All right. There's a band that's going to go far, hopefully. Hopefully.
So they went from the Whistle Kings to the Kings.
Yeah.
The rest is history.
Well, sort of, yeah. Whistle King had a deal with my dad, and I think something somehow went awry. And then Bob Ezrin ended up picking them up, changing their name from Whistle King to the Kings. And then the rest is history.
Right.
But yeah, it's just a mix-up of bad luck that happened with that. My dad also helped out with a bunch of other musicians. There was a band out of Winnipeg called Les Pucks, and my dad produced a direct-to-disc album that they did, and they did it all in one take, right off the floor.
Really?
And it's a great album.
Wow.
And also he helped out with FM a bit, with National Slash, Cameron Hawkins, and Martin Deller.
Really?
Yeah.
So he had his hands in some real Canadian music history.
For sure, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he's on the back of the FM Black Noise album. He also wrote the back liner notes for April Wine's Live at the On the Combo album. The whole back album is all my dad. So yeah, he...
No kidding.
he touched a lot of musicians, and a lot of people looked up to him. My dad used to talk quite a bit with Geddy Lee and Kim Mitchell, and we did all those. He did I believe he emceed the New Year's Eve bashes they used to do with Max Webster and Rush at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the fun thing about growing up in that era too, is that when I was still going to school, in grade school, like in junior high and things like that, he'd phone me up and he'd go, "Kevin, make sure you take a nap when you get after school, when you get home from school." Well, I knew that meant I was going to a concert that night, which was awesome, because it happened sometimes 4 or 5 nights a week. So I got to see a lot of bands, and I got to see a lot of going-ons backstage. My favorite story was Eric Clapton. I Shot the Sheriff tour. I believe it was 77 or something like that. I'm not even sure of the date. But Alice Cooper was backstage. So my dad was interviewing some of the opening band afterwards, after the first set, after they got off. And Eric Clapton was on stage, and I was hanging around my dad, kind of being clingy, and got a Coke in my hands. He says, "Go talk to Alice, would you?" I went, "Alice who?" And he says, "Well, that's Alice Cooper over there." I'm like, "Holy crap, it is." So I go walking over and introduced myself, and Alice and I chatted for about an hour about Saturday morning cartoons. He loved cartoons. And my dad was a huge George of the Jungle fan, so we talked a lot about cartoons. And then he says, "Kev, do you like beer?" I'm like, "Yeah, I like beer." So he pours my Coke down the sink, fills it full of beer, hands it back to me. He says, "Don't tell your father." I'm like, "No, I'm okay." And that was, and then...
and the rest is history there, too, isn't it, Kevin?
Well, I ended up getting my picture taken by in the front page paper of the Toronto Star, of me and Alice Cooper going cross-eyed together, holding up our cans of Coke.
No way.
Yeah, I used the cans of Coke in air quotes there.
I caught that, yeah.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah, no
And
kidding.
then I got to meet Alice a couple of times at Nimbus 9 Studios. Another good story about Nimbus 9 is the Guess Who was recording the Clap for the Wolfman, it was the Road Food album.
Right.
And the night before was when they recorded Clap for the Wolfman with Wolfman Jack. Well, I guess it was nothing but a huge drunk fest. The next day, they had to record the guitar parts for the song One Way Road to Hell.
Right.
Probably the worst song the Guess Who have ever done. It's such a boring, horrible song. I never liked it. Anyway, so they had a pinball machine in the lobby of Nimbus 9 Studios.
Right.
But you weren't supposed to play it when the bands were recording, and we never knew why. And myself and Jack Richardson's son, Kelly, we used to play on the same hockey team, but we used to hang out at the studio, so we were playing pinball just as they were recording the guitar parts for One Way Road to Hell. The reason we weren't supposed to be playing the pinball machine is because there was a broken rheostat or something in the machine that was causing clicking on the tape.
Oh.
And just as he was about to do the silent part in this song, the clicking started. Well, Jack came flying out of the studio, pulls the plug, says a whole whack of words I'm not supposed to say on a podcast.
I can imagine.
Oh, yeah, red in the face. And
Yeah.
Jack was a large man.
Yeah.
We got kicked out of the studio. And then they needed to find, because the guitar player at the time really didn't want to continue. It was like too hard. Everybody was too hungover.
Yeah.
So they had to find some way to hide these clicks. So they ended up putting a typewriter in the song. My dad was actually playing the typewriter on that song. Yeah, on that album, the One Way Road to Hell. Yeah.
Dad saves your bacon.
Yeah, basically.
Wow.
I still got yelled at pretty good.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. These are great stories. So one story I want to touch on is the Rolling Stones.
Okay.
Your dad plays a big part in Canadian history with the Rolling Stones, and I'd love you to tell that story as well as you know it.
I don't really know what to say except that the Stones were playing, and I believe it was Rich Stadium, and they decided they were going to broadcast kind of like a play-by-play, and that's how my dad treated it. He treated it like a game, like he was super enthusiastic. But
Yeah.
what they ended up doing was doing the in between songs, my dad would do the talking and the play-by-play on what just happened, but.
And this is happening live.
Sort of.
Oh.
Because what they were doing, because they didn't have broadcast rights to do a simulcast.
No.
I believe they had to use cuts from their live album.
Oh, really?
And they played that in its stead, yes. Yeah.
While the live concert's happening.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then when Keith Richards, he wasn't allowed in Canada because of the heroin issue.
That's right.
And then when he did play, he had to do the 2 benefit shows at the Oshawa Civic Arena.
That's correct.
For the CNIB, I believe it was for.
Yes.
And my dad got to MC those 2 shows. So,
Really?
yeah.
So he introduced.
Yep.
And
Keith Richards and the New Barbarians. It wasn't the Rolling Stones, right?
No.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Even though it was the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Did you get to be present for those?
No, that was a sold out thing. That
Yeah.
There's no way. Sorry, I can't even squeeze you in. There's no way.
No
Yeah.
doubt.
Yeah.
Right on. So that's your dad, the on-air personality. What was he like as your dad?
Ooh. My ass still hurts.
Oh, the tough questions.
He used to hit me in the back of the tennis racket and go, "That's for what you did that I didn't see you do." No, it was actually really good. It was my dad unfortunately left when I was 12 years old.
Right.
That took me a couple of years to get over, for sure.
Yes.
I was a very angry young man, but got over it. We became, from the time I guess I was 16 till he passed, we were the best of friends. So.
That's good.
And he passed in 97, so it's been quite a few years now. And yeah, still get the twinge every once in a while, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I did my stints in radio, so
Yeah.
I kind of followed in his footsteps, but they're awfully big footsteps to follow in.
They sure are. But why don't you tell us a little bit about that anyways?
What, following in his footsteps?
Well, you had some stints in radio, and you did some DJing. So
Tell
us about that.
DJing for 30 years. I started out at CHUC in Cobourg.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was working nightclubs. I've been working nightclubs since I was 18 years old. I first started with a company out of Toronto called Disc Jockeys Unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to have clubs all over Toronto. Well, as an 18-year-old kid, my first gig was at... I can't remember the name of the bar, dude. House of Lancaster in Mississauga.
Oh.
I'm like, oh, okay. It's weird that they have me scheduled for noon till 6. I wonder what's going on there. I go in there, and it's a strip bar.
Oh.
I'm like, oh, okay.
That's prime time
Hey,
in a
I
strip
think
bar.
I like this gig. I might just stay with this DJing thing. So, I worked there for a little while, and then went to the New Shamrock in Toronto, and that was a huge jump for me, because then it was me playing, and then there was bands in between. So I used to run bands like Coney Hatch, Kim Mitchell, Gatto, all kinds of really good acts in this place.
Right.
And I worked there for 4 years, and then from there, I had gotten married. Bad mistake. Not that I'm bitter. Yeah.
I'll edit that out. No, I won't. No, I'm not going to bother. Sorry, it stays.
Yeah, so I was at the New Shamrock, and then my marriage split up, and it split up in a kind of awkward way. So I went to my dad's house and said, "Hey, I really want to get the hell out of town." And he says, "Well, that's so weird. A friend of mine owns a bar in Coburg, wants to know if you want to go up there." And so next day I was on a train to Coburg. I didn't even know where Coburg was. And I ended up spending 9 years there, met my wife there, DJ'd in a nightclub that held about 600 people.
Nice.
It used to have it packed every single night. And
Really?
it was crazy back then.
Yeah.
It was the 80s, so
Yes.
no disco, but a lot of bands that not many people were playing back then. Back in the 80s, I was a step ahead of even the clubs in Toronto. So,
Right.
yeah, and I like to keep that way. I started doing beat mixing when no one else had even thought of it yet, and things like that.
Really?
My dad was actually blown away when he came up to see me once. He's like, "Oh my God, you've got these people into a frenzy." And he says, "And then you bring them down, but then they go right back up again." He says, "You have a knack for that." He says, Live, I was awesome. Because I used to dance along. I'd come out of there absolutely dripping with sweat. Like I just did a huge show or something like that. And then that's how you do it.
Yeah.
You'd make it into a show. It's not about you. It's what they want to hear.
Yes.
What you want them to hear, that's going to make them just love you even more.
Right
So
on.
that's what I did. And then from there I went, I did a short news stint for about 2 years with a radio station in the Dominican Republic, 92.5 FM Ruby.
How does that happen?
That happened from my living room. My brother was the station manager. The Dominican Republic did not have a English-speaking radio station. So there was a license that came up, and my brother and another gentleman, purchased the license, and they had the station for only about 2 years, because in the Dominican, when there is an election coming up, the government seizes your radio station, basically, the frequency.
Right.
And then they give it back after the political things left. But you have to rebid for it. So we're asking too much money. So
that's
the
probably still
partners
going
backed
on.
out. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Well, it turns out that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and really good to hear some of these stories.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you very much for coming into the studio.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All
It's
right.
great to keep like I said, the memory alive. And
Yeah.
Doug Thompson, like I said, he's preserving all the Chum stuff. So if you want to look in on that, check it out.
I want to look into that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, David.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, Kev.
This is in Toronto. Well, today is a special day. Not only Remembrance Day 1977, but the end of an era. This is Larry Wilson's last in Toronto program, as you well know.
Am I getting fired?
Not exactly. Oh, it's something like that. In fact, after 18 years, this particular day brings the curtain down on a major phase of Larry's broadcasting career. Now, we've prepared something for you, especially for you, in recognition of your years in the news business.
Well, where is it?
It's supposed to be happening soon.
Not very well.
Larry Wilson. This was your news life. Wilson leaves public affairs and news today to embark on a new career. Larry becomes just another disc jockey.
It Happened in Ontario is recorded at Treblecock Studio in downtown Peterborough. For more information, go to treblecock.ca. Thanks as always to my dear friend Paul Thompson for the music.
I've blessed others, been blessed in return. I've seen a few